Okay, here we go. Got it right that time. Good evening again, everybody. Tonight, we're going to do, so this is the first time I've done what I'm going to do tonight. I've added a couple of things to our Thursday night. So we have 4 different things, which will each be on a 4-weekly rotation. This one, which we'll do again in 4 weeks and so forth, I just picked something to talk about. Something, a Buddhist label. So it can be one of the lists, it can be one of the things from the list, but it's going to be something that we come across a lot. That is pretty foundational. And a lot of these are going to be things that I find a lot of the time are just misunderstood. So I want to talk about it and then we'll talk among ourselves about it. The one I'm going to talk about tonight is non-self. So I'm going to talk about the 3 marks of existence and non-self. I do have some pieces of paper here which I will refer to. I'm going to start there, and one of them is a sutra that I'll work through. I'm going to start though by some reflections on what this is not. Actually, before I go there, I will acknowledge this is a hotly debated and maybe even controversial topic. 2 of my very favorite scholars in the Theravada tradition, Thanissaro Bhikkhu and Bhikkhu Bodhi, they several years ago had a very public disagreement about what non-self means. There were letters back and forth and they were published, and it was quite fierce. So these are not black and white, and in different Buddhist traditions there are different views of them as well. So I'm going to land on what this means to me, and then we'll see whether it works for you as well. So what I find most of all, and very importantly, what I think this is not, and where this goes astray, non-self is not nihilism. Non-self is not saying none of this is real. When the old Dechuan thing where if a tree falls in the forest and nobody listens, is there actually a forest? This is here. There are bundles of energy, bundles of karma that think they are beings. This is here. Non-self doesn't deny this realm in which we're talking to each other. So it's not nihilism. It's not nothing. Secondly, and these are places where I think things go astray, crazy wisdom. So there are a number of places where enlightened teachers, so-called enlightened teachers, have been engaged in behavior that by almost all standards is sexual abuse. It's a power play where they're in a position of power, other people aren't. And so there's sexual relationships that by most standards, almost all standards, will be abuse. There are abuses of financial abuses, all these things. And often the response to that, when accused, the person would say, well, let's be clear, we're in a Buddhist environment here. There's no me, there's no person being abused, there's no act of abuse, so we're good. How can there be an abuse when there's no self? Because there's no self there and there's no self here. No, there's suffering. There's clearly suffering. And if we're creating suffering, we're not understanding non-self. A Buddhist teacher once said to me, he was describing this, he was actually describing Zen mind, which is a way of getting at no self, right? And he said, when you get a blowout on the interstate, you just kind of manage to steer this car that's going rapidly out of control and come to a complete stop right in front of a tree. That's Zen mind. No, it's not. That was done without any awareness. The awareness is Zen mind. The awareness of this is not so much the action itself. I'm overly separating the two at this point. But if it's done instinctively without awareness, you're missing what Zen mind really is, which is precisely this awareness. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my sutras. Or my suttas, as I should be more properly describe them, because they're out of the Pali Canon. So I'm going to read I'm not going to read it. I'm going to skip and pick highlights out of the Buddha's second sermon, which is called the Paññicca Sutta, which is also translated as the five brethren. and it was his second sermon, just a few days after his first sermon, was the Dhamma Cakkappavattana, the turning the wheel of Dharma. And then sometime later, he delivered the fire sermon. So some of you heard me talk about the fire sermon. So the first two are background for the fire sermon, but I'm going to look at it in a different way and use the first and the third as kind of a frame for the second, looking at the development of the Buddhist thinking. So the first one, the Dhamma Cakkappavattana, Buddha had woken up. He had lived the life of a prince, overindulged, had this wonderful, pleasant life. Every time anything went wrong, he could give him more stuff to make it go away. Just, pleasures, just pure pleasures. The life of a god, really. That's what they were trying to create, was for this young person, a life that paralleled the life in the heavenly abodes. And then he said he stubbed his toe, saw sickness, old age, and death, and he saw a wanderer, and he went over the wall, he went out into the woods, and ended up practicing in deeply ascetic practices. He became really emaciated, intentionally inflicting self-pain, seeing this as a way of letting go of the body. So he practiced these two extremes, but he realized that wasn't the truth. He came back, fed himself gently, and realized the apple tree story. He would remember when he was a child, sitting under the apple tree, beautiful sunny day. Everything was beautiful. He had this pleasure that didn't rely on anything. And remembered that and thought, maybe that's the way. So that's the start of this middle path that he taught. So the first sermon is saying, from a physician standpoint, the problem is dukkha, the problem is suffering. The cause of suffering is clinging, the cause of suffering is craving. Craving and then clinging. There is a way out. I've found the way out. So as a physician, here's the problem, the illness, and here's the cause of the illness. Here's the cure. There is a cure, and the cure is the Noble Eightfold Path. And before articulating the Noble Eightfold Path, he said, avoiding these two extremes, the extreme of self-indulgence, self-gratification, and the extreme of self-mortification. And he listed what those do. And he said, avoiding these two extremes, the Tathagata found the middle way. So that's not indulging in sense pleasures, not totally cutting off, not going down the path of nihilism. Middle way. And then he articulated the Noble Eightfold Path. The second teaching talks more about what that path is. The third teaching, which is the fire sermon, said everything is on fire. Everything is on fire. The six senses are on fire. The all, being the world as we experience, is on fire. And that one is going to nirvana, which is release, and that it is, he's talking there about the end of suffering, describing that suffering is this clinging, and just release as flames being released from fuel is nirvana. The second teaching is the more mechanical. So how do we practice this? So the second teaching, form, monks, is not self. If form was self, this form would not lend itself to dukkha, to dis-ease, to discomfort, to inconstancy, to unreliability. It would be possible to say, with regard to form being, for example, this, let my form be thus. If this was mine, I could tell it what to do. Let my form be thus. Or let my form not be thus. But precisely because form is not self, this form lends itself to dukkha. And it is not possible to say, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus. And then he does the same for the other aggregates, feeling, perception, mental formations or fabrications, and consciousness. And then he asks, what do you think, monks? Is form constant or inconstant? Permanent or impermanent? Of course, it's inconstant. And if it's inconstant, is it easeful or stressful? It's stressful. It causes dukkha, causes suffering. And is it fitting to regard what is inconstant, stressful, subject to change as this is mine, this is myself, this is what I am. Of course it's not. He does the same with the other attributes. And then he concludes by basically saying, thus, monks, with regard to any form, feeling, perception, mental formation, or fabrication that is past, present, or future, internal or external, blatant or subtle, common or sublime, far and near, anything, every form, feeling, perception, etc., is to be seen with right discernment as it has come to be. This is not mine. This is not myself. This is not what I am. And then if you really get that, that itself is release. That teaching, I think it's out of that structure that the chain of dependent origination grew. The chain of dependent origination is a more sophisticated way of describing impermanence or inconstancy. It's a way of describing it in terms of causes and conditions. Because of contact, there is feeling. Because of feeling, there is craving. Because of craving, there is clinging, and so on. This is a way of describing inconstancy. And unraveling that is letting go of inconstancy, which is seeing non-self. But this is what comes first. And there are some teachers, and one of my favorite teachers, who's Ajahn Chah, very, very erudite man, very influential in the Thai forest tradition. And you know, when he was a novice, he learned so much stuff. He learned Vinaya. He could quote chapter and verse out of Vinaya, the monastic code, which is really big. He learned many, many sutras. He learned the whole Dhammapada. And he hasn't forgotten it, but he didn't recite, he didn't use that central in his teaching. What he would do all the time, he would say, all you do, number one, when you're meditating, chant But with the in-breath, Do with the out-breath, which is basically wake up, wake up, wake up. So you're just, it's a way of staying on the breath. And with everything just constantly perceiving inconstancy. That's it. All he taught. So we get to non-self precisely from this inconstancy. So there are going to be a number of little sidebars in here, which Luke come back. So one of them is Buddha, wake up. Buddhism, the teaching of Buddhism is actually really simple. It's not easy. It's not easy, but it's really, really simple. Buddha was so called because when he first went back to the 5 monks, they saw this glowing, radiant thing and said, who are you? What are you? Are you a god? And he said, I am awake. That's what he said. I am awake. And that, hence this, I'm awake. What did this awake mean? We woke up this morning and realized, oh, that was a dream. This is real, that was a dream. I didn't realize it was a dream when I was in it, but now I'm not in it. I can see that was a dream. Buddha's experience was we can wake up from this reality in exactly the same way and see all of this as a dream. The truth is, most of us go around most of the day totally unaware that we are even here. Most of what happens is completely automatic. How many times have you arrived home and just, oh, had no memory of the drive, or finished washing the dishes, or putting your shoes on, or cooking the meal? All of these things happen and our mind is off somewhere else. It just happened. So much of our lives is done without us even being present. The first step and the most important step to this of waking up is to just be here. Waking up is to be present. When you're present, you start to see what's really going on. If you're really present, then you can start to see the inconstancy of stuff, and that none of it's reliable or dependable, and that none of it really can be held onto. There is nothing there that can be held onto, nothing at all. So step one of waking up is just cultivating 24/7 by 365 mindfulness. Really simple, really hard, but really simple. So that's in many ways, that is really the heart of our practice, is to just learn to pay attention. This is what the 8th step of the Noble Path is actually about, concentration, right? Concentration fundamentally is learning to pay attention all the time. And once we can learn to pay attention all the time, we can control where we direct that attention. But first, we've got to learn to be paying attention all the time. So I talked about, so I'm going to go to the jhanas, another loophole, the jhanas. The jhanas, for many, it's the 4-letter word of Buddhism. It's, this thing that people don't like to talk about. But they're kind of important. And if we just demystify them, they're just levels of concentration, levels of being settled in concentration. That's all it is. It means it's just an intensification of concentration. So we're all trying to concentrate, whether it's on following the breath or on a mantra or on metta practice. We're all trying to concentrate when we meditate. And the jhanas are just simply a bunch of signs that describe the intensity of concentration. What they describe, if you step through the jhanas, the first couple include these really rich senses of pleasure and joy, and they also include vitaka and vikara, which are applied and sustained thought. The mind being present, the mind being focused, and the mind being investigative. And then as you settle deeper into the jhanas, vitaka and vikara disappear. Pleasure stays, but vitaka and vikara disappear. The mind has stopped. What that means is we've dropped off mind. We've let go, the voice, we've let go of speech. The speech is gone. We have dropped it. We have let go of it. Now, it's something that happens automatically as we settle down, but the voice is just let go of. As we continue to settle down, there's this very open awareness of the body. And then moving from the 4 jhanas into the 4 formless realms, which are a continuation, the body disappears. And this is something that you can experience if you settle down. You can start noticing the porous nature of the body and focus on the gaps rather than the body itself. And you can recognize fluidity through the body, and the body disappears. We've let go of the body. So this is who's let go, what's let go of the body. There's still some form of fabrication here, but we've let go of the body. We've let go of the body into boundless space. The body just leaks into space. So we've got this idea of boundless space. Then who's there with boundless space? What's aware of this boundless space? There's boundless consciousness. That's how those are translated. Now I'm coming to this word boundless intentionally here, because that's the crux of this. As we settle down and we start letting go of things, then what's left is boundless. And there's a distinction between boundless, where there is something, and emptiness, where you've not got anything in there. There's nothing you can put your hand on. There's nothing you can hold. It's like smoke. There's nothing there. When we're in this boundless space, there is space, or there is consciousness. But with emptiness, there's nothing there. There's just this awareness. So this is a process, really, of letting go of the self. We're going through a process here of letting go of the self. The self is everything we identify with as me. And by stepwise through the jhanas, I let go of the duality of language, the duality of the structure of language, and that form of analytical thinking. We let go of this sack of skin and bones itself. It's still here. It's just not what we think it is, and it's not something we identify with. There's still an awareness, which is the me, right? So there's still this awareness, but there's no body it's holding on to. And as we get deeper into it, we end up with more loose things, which are space and then consciousness. They're still there, they're boundless. And eventually we let go of those too. There's still awareness, but we've let go of all of this stuff. This is what it's described in the Pali Canon as consciousness without surface, or consciousness that does not land, depending on which way around you look at it, which is this awareness which doesn't attach to anything. In the Diamond Sutra, we talk of waking up the mind that does not dwell, the mind not dwelling on anything. Same thing. It's the mind, but it doesn't stick, it doesn't hold on to it, doesn't attach to anything. And this is that mind awakes, which is the wake up, right? This is being present and being with that mind. It's there all the time. And this is what I was talking earlier about, the instruction, the teaching that when you just bring this broken car to a stop, when the car comes to stop by the tree, that Zen mind. No, it's not. Zen mind is this consciousness that doesn't land. It's the mind not dwelling. And it's the ability of that mind not dwelling to then step in and function. But it's the mind not dwelling. We'll come back to the car in a minute. And this happens in the same sutra, the Dhamma Sutra. Not dwelling, not dwelling on ego, personality, being, or self. Not dwelling on form, feeling, form, sense, sound, smell. Sound, smell, taste, sense, touch. I've got it wrong. But the five senses, right? I've got to start in the right place and set quickly, and I'll get there. Another one we're going to get. This is a commentary on the Anapanasati Sutta, which many folks would tell you, and I have no reason to disagree with, but it's written down in a number of places. This is actually what the Buddha was practicing when he woke up. There are 16 steps, 4 tetrads. The first tetrad is around the breath or the body. The second is around, it's generally translated as around feeling. It's actually around body conditioners or mind conditioners. There's a slightly different word. It's not the same word as feeling, but generally talks about feelings. The third tetrad is about mind, and the fourth tetrad is about dharmas. And I'm going to just look at the fourth tetrad here, and it goes through this process of letting go. And I'm coming back to this letting go because the no self is a letting go. No, non-self is a letting go of that with which we identify. That's what non-self is about. Back to is this form, well, let's go to the last page. Any form whatsoever that is past, present, future, internal, external, etc., should be seen with right discernment as it has come to be. This is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. So by seeing inconstancy and the connection between inconstancy and dukkha, we let go of everything. And letting go of everything is letting go of this is not mine, this is not myself, this is not what I am. Letting go ultimately of the self itself. He or she trains him or herself constantly contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe in. Constantly contemplating impermanence, I shall breathe out. That's anicca, which also translates as inconstancy. So we're breathing in, breathing out, constantly contemplating anicca, which is what Ajahn Chah teaches. Constantly contemplate anicca. Everything that comes up, impermanence. See impermanence or let it go. He trains himself constantly contemplating viraga. Viraga can be translated as fading away or dispassion. I shall breathe in. Constantly contemplating viraga. I shall breathe out. Breathing in, breathing out. And I should have read the tail end of this second sutra. Seeing thus, as in seeing the inconstancy of everything, the instructed disciple of the noble ones grows disenchanted with form, disenchanted with feeling, disenchanted with the aggregates. Disenchanted, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, he is released. So these are the steps of disenchantment, dispassion, and release. Viraga, dispassion, cessation, fading away. He trains himself thus, this is the 15th step, constantly contemplating nirodha, which means cessation or quenching. I breathe in, constantly contemplating nirodha, I breathe out. So we're going through these steps of seeing inconstancy, moving to dispassion, moving to cessation, constantly contemplating. He trains himself, 16, constantly contemplating tossing back or letting go. The word is patinissaga, which is translated as tossing back or letting go, just releasing. Constantly, you see it in constancy, you become dispassionate, and you let go. So non-self, that's what this is about. It's about seeing all of this as inconstant, as unreliable, and therefore causing dukkha, and not being something that is worth holding on to. And as we do that, our engagement with it, our interest in it decreases. And pleasure is found elsewhere, meaning is found elsewhere. It's found in this mind that's let go, the mind that doesn't dwell, the consciousness that does not land. Just let go of this. But the letting go of it is to be done carefully and wisely, because if we let go of it without properly following the path, we risk landing ourselves in the place of those masters, because all the ones I know of are male, of those masters who engage in these practices of abuse. Because they've left the body behind, they've left all of the aggregates behind. But they're not praying aggregates, there's something missing. So the path is one to be navigated slowly and carefully, because along this path, we are constantly forming selves. We're constantly forming selves. Natalie, Bruce, and I were here a little while ago playing with cameras and doing stuff here with cameras. And we put on a particular self. Each of us assembled a certain set of skills, a certain set of memories, and a certain ability to use our bodies and minds in that environment. We did that, we put it aside, we're done. Disassembled that self, and then we came back in here and we sat for 40 minutes and we assembled a completely different self. Completely different self. And then I rang the bell, pushed a few buttons, and then we all put on a completely different self. We're doing this all the time. Dressing in a self and then letting it go, and dressing in one and letting it go. Most of the time we don't notice this is happening, done profoundly unskillful. Because we don't notice ourselves doing it. We're unaware of all the elements we bring into this self. We're unaware of the impact those elements have on peace versus dukkha here, and peace versus dukkha out there. So it's done unskillfully and unreflectively. As we go down the path, we become more aware. As we start to wake up and become present and become more skillful with our presence, we become more aware of the selves we're assembling. And we can start to recognize when some of the things we're bringing into a self are unskillful. And we can start to train ourselves. We bring that deep wired conditioning forward to the frontal brain. We relearn, and then that slowly slips back. And we're retraining this form to be in the world in a way of complete virtue, living a life of virtue. So, and we become more and more rarefied and more subtle in this. And this sack of skin and bones likewise becomes more and more subtle. And the training it's receiving is more and more subtle. So when that place where we let the body go, when we step away and we say, I'm no self, which is, this is the last step. Right? You've gone to the other shore, you step off the raft onto the other shore, we're done. That last step, this sack of skin and bones is incapable of acting in a way that causes harm. It's because it is the Brahma Viharas. It is kindness and love. So of course, I've not met that person, but whether you get to the end of that path or not, as a trajectory and as a direction, it's the responsible way to negotiate this. Well, I believe it's the responsible way to negotiate this practice, which is a practice about incrementally letting go of stuff, letting go of the things we identify with, letting go of the identity of self, and then being able to skillfully assemble and disassemble cells without being attached to them, without really identifying with them, but using them skillfully to accomplish interactions and help relieve suffering. I just finished with Dogen, which just came to mind, which is Dogen in the Shobogenzo wrote, to study the way is to study the self, the way being the Dharma, the path. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. It's not to black out. It's not to be the person who drives the car when they're not present and it comes to a stop. It's to forget that there's a person doing it. It's to be aware, but to forget that this is a person. To have no ego, no personality, no being, and no self, no life. To study the ways to forget, to forget, to study the ways to study the self, to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is for the myriad dharmas to come forth in enlightenment, and boundless enlightenment or eternity or something like that. Meaning what's left is there's no identity with self. It's just enlightened existence, seeing things as it is. Shunryu Suzuki said, there are no enlightened beings. There is only enlightened activity, which is another way of saying the same thing. So that's what I have for you on no self or non-self. What do you all have for me on that same topic? Anyone? Questions, comments? No?
I'm reminded when you were mentioning about the thing about the skin bag and everything. I was remembering the Jung and his skin
Hey,
bag lament.
Lucian, your microphone is really muffled.
Um,
How about now?
Much better.
Nothing?
Much better. No, you're much better.
Okay, so I remember when you were speaking of this in Su Yun's Skin Bag Lament. He's speaking about the corporeal body and how to basically, this is not the self, this is not I. We've been given this body for a reason, but if we become attached to it, then we become completely deluded. And it was just interesting to hear you say that, because in non-being, especially with Dogen mentioning in his enlightenments that mind and body fall away, mind and body fall away, saying that, and this is a thing that's I'm wondering kind of what the experience would have been like in that, and just kind of weird curiosity that I have, and I don't think that I've experienced that yet, but I don't know if we'll ever will, but it's interesting just kind of to what are your thoughts about, I guess, what Dogen was speaking about?
So there's I can't remember the name of Dogen's teacher, Nyozo. So the story about Dogen, he was a Japanese practicing monk. He'd been in many traditions. He got all these wonderful teachers, and at some point, much like Buddha, he said, I've trained with great people, but none of these have it. I want to go find a real teacher. So he went to China and tried to practice with a couple of people. And then he went to this guy, Nyozo, and he was sitting there, and this is now Gareth version of the story. So he had an experience when he was meditating and went rushing off the nyozo, and he said, Shinjin Datsurak, dropping off body mind. That's what that means, dropping off body and mind, which is this progression through the jhanas that I talked about, right? So you go through, the voice stops, and then you lose the body, and then you keep on going, and the mind stops too. Dropping off body mind. And Nyozo laughed and said, Datsurak, Datsurak. Dropping off, dropping off. You're still holding on to something, sunshine. So Dogen shamefacedly went that. So there are a couple of things in there that come to what you're bringing up, Mushin. The first is we have this whole progression of experiences. They are experiences because there's a me there at this point experiencing. But we have this whole series of experiences as we get deeper and deeper into meditation. And there are these openings. Some of them can be really dramatic openings. Some of them can be openings into kind of experiences of non-duality, but there's still a self here trying to have that experience that becomes overwhelming to the self, and we can have these sort of shuddering tear experiences. So there's discontinuous experiences that we can go through, and they're really profound. People want to hold on to them or go back to them, which is understandable because they're really profound, and they are steps on the path. They're important steps. The thing to do isn't to try and hold on to them. The thing to do is to try and investigate. Now, how did that happen? What was I doing? Is there something in there? Because that was presumably skillful practice that I was engaging in that took me to that place. What was I doing? And is there something there that I can continue to practice? May or may not give me the same experience, but it's a good form of practice, which is another reason why be present, because you don't want any of this stuff to happen when you don't know what's going on. So that's thing one, which is the continuity of this path and all the little milestones along the way, all the wonderful openings that fade away, and yet many leave an echo and continue to inform our lives in very rich ways. They continue to stay there and let us see the world as a more beautiful thing, let go of some of the edges of clinging and craving that we used to hold on to. Second is, and this is the way they inform the rest of the life. If we look at that carefully, we can see selfing, the verb, the act of creating these cells, becoming more skillful because we are less attached. These openings, these dropping offs, they show us we can do that. They show us what life is like without holding on to those things. And so we just naturally become looser. We naturally start letting go of things. And we naturally start seeing more clearly. So we naturally become more skillful about selfing and do less selfing. As for the last one, there can be no answer. Because that can't be brought back into this realm. Buddha talked around it. Buddha intentionally, I believe intentionally in the Pali Canon, spent very little time talking about emptiness. The word emptiness shows up a few times, shows up a lot in the commentaries on the Pali Suttas, but he never really describes nirvana. He talks about release, talks about true freedom, and then teaches the path. A lot of other Buddhist traditions, once again, gets into China and you start bumping into Taoism, start to get a lot more language describing the unconditioned, the Dharmakaya, the nirvana. And then you start setting up the duality between the relative and the absolute. So then you have to come back and describe the middle way, and then that becomes an absolute. So you have the four truths that show. So you can't actually do it in a meaningful way. You can do it, and then you start creating a reality out of it. And the problem is we start to create a reality out of it. Probably not a satisfactory answer, but it's all I've got for you. Anybody else? Whitney and then Clay. I'm sorry, Whitney and then Natalie.
I didn't notice. I've been thinking a lot about agency, karma, action, and no self, and the relation of it. So this has helped a lot. I guess I want you to comment on this as I'm listening to you. I'm thinking, so really the only true agency we have, we're only truly exercising agency when we let go. Because at any other time, we are being driven by clinging and craving.
There is a yes with a strong reservation. Okay. So the reservation is where I'm going to spend the time, because the answer is yes. The reservation is karma only exists because we think it exists. Karma is something we make up. And we make it up precisely because we're making up a me. So this is samsara, this is the cycle. As long as I think there's a me, I am generating karma. When I realize there's no me, I stop generating karma. Does that make sense?
Yes.
This is also where we get into the whole idea of rebirth. What's reborn? Because when you really understand what karma is, there is nothing to be reborn. Rebirth doesn't exist. And yet, as long as I think I exist, I'm throwing off karma all the time. And that karma continues. So rebirth is simply the continuation of this karma that's being created when I think there's a me. When I stop thinking there's a me, rebirth stops. There's a second caveat on this, which is a more subtle caveat, and it's one I talked about, which is that recognizing then there's no me. This is the first time I heard this was the end of the first Spider-Man movie I saw, and there's probably like 20 or 30 of them now, so I don't know which one it was. But with great power comes great responsibility. To recognize there's no me completely changes relationship with the world, and it imposes great responsibility, because unless this is done skillfully, we can become very easily that enlightened Buddhist master who goes around engaging in financial abuse, sexual abuse, all these other exploitative arrangements with other people, because from that place, it is not seen that there are still other energy centers out there that think they are beings, and so they are suffering. And the responsibility is to engage in a way that reduces that suffering rather than continues to exacerbate and increase it.
I would argue that they're not enlightened beings. See, I would argue, to me, what I see when I hear that is they are stuck clinging and craving. They just don't recognize their own clinging and craving.
I agree with you completely. I agree with you completely. But it's a place that a lot of people get stuck. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Natalie.
I actually was gonna argue the opposite.
The opposite being
What you
agency.
should just agree
Okay.
on.
Buddhism is a wonderful thing. You often can
Yeah.
have both sides. Don't pick and choose.
Yeah. So these things happen so often,
These things.
like abuse
Yeah.
of,
Okay. These things.
abuse, financial, sexual, etc. Of teachers who have achieved a level of enlightenment, or just understanding, grasping the nature of consciousness of non-self. That I think that's not just a bug. To some degree or more, it's a feature.
Mhm.
And I think it's a feature because there is no self, whether one realizes it or doesn't.
Right.
There is no self. there is nobody to really govern the actions before before the realization of no self, just as there is nobody to govern the actions as after the realization of no self. So the behavior, we have people who have actually, I think all of these abusers, I think they have achieved some level of enlightenment. They may have, whatever they share, they may have actually realized they may have had an experience of no self.
Mhm.
They may have had an experience of anicca. They may have had an experience of, the bottom falling out. I mean, all of these experiences that we hear people have when they are practicing for a long time. But what governs the organism are multiple processes that happen in it simultaneously at the same time. And if these processes, like if that organism has a tendency, genetic or by dint of prior experience, of some like physical inclinations towards, like sexual experiences or towards, empowerment or something like that, even with the realization of no self and anicca, etc., these processes are continuing to sort of, behave in certain ways. And once they realize like, oh, there is no self, there is also, I think, a greater empowerment of these processes that previously were not so empowered because the person may have, kind of suppressed them. But now there's empowerment because if there is no self, then this person is enlightened and everything that they do kind of is enlightened. But that's, that's why we have, I think, certain humans who get enlightened and they don't get into that type of abuse. Whether they're enlightened or not, they just are humans who don't do these kinds of abuses. Look at Keanu Reeves. Even before there was a Me Too movement, he was taking pictures and he was always like stretching his hand out. So he never touches the woman.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of human he is. He's just a really beautiful, human being.
Yep.
And so I think that that's not just a bug. I think it's like a feature of the human organism. So we have like different people who are introverts, people who are extroverts, whether they achieve enlightenment or not, that kind of personality, that really doesn't change much.
So I'm going to, we're at time, but I'm going to say a few words about that and then we'll finish. And what you're on is one of the core places of disagreement in the argument about non-self. You really are. I mean, this doesn't have an answer. The only answer happens when you truly wake up and you say, this is it. So if you get, from that place, you can have a meaningful conversation. The rest of us, we're all clutching at straws. But I will give you my thoughts on it, because, I will give you my thoughts on it. So these teachers, yes, clearly they have had really profound enlightenment experiences, really deep experiences. Many of them have been on, like a lot of this happens in the Tibetan tradition, for example. And in the Tibetan tradition, to be a Lama, you go on a 3-year retreat. I mean, you're sitting there in a monastery for 3 years and you spend much of it just sitting there, got 3 walls around you. So if you fall asleep, you bang your head. I mean, you can't fall over. Yes, they have had really deep experiences. But to have deep experiences is to say there is somebody having the experience, right? So there's still something there. The Buddha's practice, he studied with 2 teachers whose names I forget, and they went really, really deep into the jhanas. They went to, boundless consciousness, to no thingness. I mean, they were really deep in this, and they thought they were done. The Buddha practiced with them, and he reached that place and he said, this is really powerful, this is really deep, but I can feel there is still fabrication here. There is still meing going on here. It's incredibly subtle, but I can still feel it's here. So I'm not done. And then he went away and he found that last piece and he was able to let that go. The act of letting that go is realizing that no self is universal. And this is the Bodhisattva vow that we repeat every Sunday. It's realizing, it's waking up and realizing that I am not free, as Fannie Lou Hammond said, I'm not free until everyone's free. So as long as there is a being out there who is suffering, my work is not done. This is the aspiration and the practice of bodhisattvas. So from that place, this body cannot be causing harm in the world. There is continued existence in the world purely to relieve suffering. That is the aspiration and the practice. And the thesis is all of those genetic or trained behaviors can be retrained. May take lifetimes, but they can all be retrained so they don't act spontaneously in that way. So there is awareness and they are acting, they are responding out of compassion, not out of habit. As I said,
I believe that is possible. Yeah, I believe that that's possible to retrain. And, but people are, I guess, delusional.
which was Whitney's point, as long as they're delusional, they're not fully awake. Anyway,
But it's still not just a bug.
it's not a bug.
Yeah.
But the glitch, if you want to say there's a glitch, the glitch is this question of what is that possible in a state of being fully awake or not? Right? But it's, I've given you my views. We had an interesting conversation. We're a few minutes after time, so we should go on. You did have something.
Yeah, no, I guess follow the same conversation. The question seems to like hinge on this idea of like, if you have ever experienced these states of yourself, or like truly have that experience, like it doesn't necessarily imply that it has become a stabilized sense of how you are in the world. Like the no self to me is sort of the obverse of the question of free will. Like no self, who is there to have free will? To what you were talking about there, like our bodies are kind of driven through the world through a series of effectively deterministic causes. Like this is the environment in which I was brought up, and I had these kind of things, and there's biological elements to it and stuff like that. And like that all is going to continue whether or not I've had these insights. So it's like, to me, it doesn't seem logical to assume that someone who had reached these stages of enlightenment or moments of enlightenment would then therefore act virtuously from that point on.
I'm going to make two comments on that and then we'll finish. So the two comments. Number one, yes, the first point made, absolutely. When you have these profound awakening experiences, they don't stay. They fade. They just go. You have these really deep experiences on a retreat, and a week later it's like something stays. Something stays. There is a shift, but the self is incredibly stubborn, and ego is incredibly stubborn. It does come back. The practice part, though, is, the experience of people who stick with this practice for a long time. over time, the fading away, the return to ego is diminished. The solidity of the ego is diminished, and it really does start to evenness, with the promise that eventually it can completely disappear. And when that final waking up happens, it's done. It just doesn't come back. It's gone. It's just cutting it off at the root. It's just gone. So none of us have had that happen, but the promise is keep going for enough lifetimes. That is what happens. And the same is true for all those bodily habits. Some of them may be, most of the ones you've got in the sack of skin and bones you're in right now, you can train away. You absolutely can. It takes a lot of work, a lot of intention, and a lot of effort, but most of them you can train away. There may be a couple you can't.
Like
So-
what?
Hmm?
Like what?
No, but there may be. I'm allowing that there may be, but the theories of rebirth would tell you if your next birth, those will be retrainable. So this is a process which requires great patience. So, and this is precisely where that edge comes, because the person who acts in the way we're talking about, for me, has not finished the path. They think they have, and it's so easy to think you're done, so easy, but they haven't. And as long as you haven't, everything you've said is absolutely true. So let's finish there, folks. Thank you all. Very lovely conversation this evening. I hope you all found it useful. See you all soon.